The night was cast in a thick shroud of darkness, the moon hidden behind a veil of ominous clouds. The road stretched out ahead, winding through desolate countryside, flanked by dense forests that seemed to loom over the asphalt like silent sentinels. Jake, a weary traveler, trudged along the deserted highway, his thumb extended hopefully in the feeble glow of the streetlights. He had been hitchhiking for hours, his patience wearing thin as each passing car ignored his outstretched hand. The cold wind gnawed at his bones, and he cursed himself for not preparing better for his journey. With each passing minute, the desolation of the road seemed to grow, and a sense of unease crept over him. Just as Jake was beginning to lose hope, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the silence. A pair of headlights pierced the darkness, illuminating the road ahead as a beat-up pickup truck rumbled into view. Relief flooded through Jake as the vehicle slowed to a stop beside him, the driver rolling down the window to reveal a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a kind smile. "Need a ride, son?" the man asked, his voice rough but friendly. Jake nodded eagerly, grateful for the chance to escape the cold night air. He hoisted his backpack into the bed of the truck and climbed into the passenger seat, the warmth of the cab a welcome reprieve from the chill outside. As they drove, the man introduced himself as Tom, a local farmer who lived just a few miles down the road. Jake relaxed into the seat, listening to Tom's stories about life in the countryside as they traveled deeper into the night. But as they neared Tom's farm, Jake noticed a change in the atmosphere. The air grew thick with tension, and an inexplicable sense of dread settled over him like a suffocating blanket. He glanced out the window, his heart skipping a beat as he saw the twisted branches of the surrounding trees reaching out like gnarled fingers grasping at the darkness. "Is everything okay?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with apprehension. Tom chuckled, though there was a hint of nervousness in the sound. "Oh, don't mind that," he said, gesturing to the looming shadows outside. "Just the usual spookiness of the countryside at night." Despite Tom's reassurances, Jake couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over him. He glanced at the clock on the dashboard, noting with growing concern that it was well past midnight. "Hey, I hate to ask, but do you mind if I crash at your place for the night?" Jake said, his voice tinged with desperation. "I don't think I can make it much further on my own." Tom hesitated, his gaze flickering nervously to the rearview mirror before returning to the road ahead. "I suppose it wouldn't hurt," he said finally, though his tone lacked its earlier warmth. "But I should warn you, my place is a bit isolated." Jake nodded, too grateful for the offer of shelter to question it further. As they continued down the winding road, the sense of isolation only seemed to grow, the darkness pressing in on them from all sides like a tangible force. Finally, they reached Tom's farm, a ramshackle collection of buildings nestled at the edge of the forest. Jake followed Tom inside, his footsteps echoing hollowly in the stillness of the night. The interior of the farmhouse was just as eerie as the surrounding countryside, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth and decay. Tom led Jake to a spare bedroom, offering him a threadbare blanket and a lumpy mattress before retreating with a muttered excuse. Alone in the darkness, Jake's unease only intensified. He lay awake for hours, his senses on high alert as he listened to the creaks and groans of the old house settling around him. But despite his best efforts, sleep eluded him, and he found himself staring up at the ceiling with wide-eyed apprehension. It was well past 3 a.m. when Jake heard it, a soft scratching sound coming from somewhere outside the room. His heart hammered in his chest as he strained to listen, the noise growing louder with each passing moment. With trembling hands, Jake reached for the doorknob, his breath catching in his throat as he slowly eased the door open. The hallway beyond was shrouded in darkness, the only sound the rhythmic beat of his own heart. Steeling himself, Jake crept down the hallway, his footsteps barely making a sound on the worn floorboards. As he reached the end of the corridor, he paused, his hand hovering over the door to Tom's bedroom. With a sudden burst of courage, Jake pushed the door open, his eyes widening in horror at the sight that greeted him. Tom lay in bed, his eyes wide with fear as he stared at something unseen in the darkness. "Tom, what is it?" Jake whispered, his voice barely more than a terrified whimper. But Tom didn't respond, his gaze fixed on the corner of the room where a shadowy figure lurked in the gloom. With a sinking feeling in the pit of his stomach, Jake realized that the figure wasn't casting a shadow. It was the shadow. Without thinking, Jake lunged forward, his hands grasping at the darkness as he struggled to pull it away from Tom's bedside. But the shadow was like smoke, slipping through his fingers with a cold, insubstantial touch. In the blink of an eye, the room was plunged into darkness, the only sound the ragged gasps of Jake and Tom as they cowered in terror. And then, with a suddenness that took Jake's breath away, the darkness was gone, replaced by the feeble glow of the moonlight filtering through the window. Shaken to his core, Jake stumbled out of the room, his mind reeling with the impossibility of what he had just witnessed. But as he reached the front door, a chilling realization washed over him. The pickup truck was gone, and there was no sign of Tom or his farmhouse anywhere in sight. With a sense of mounting dread, Jake stumbled out into the night, the darkness swallowing him whole as he fled from the horrors that lurked in the shadows. And as he disappeared into the inky blackness of the forest, he knew that he would never truly escape the memory of the phantom hitchhiker who had offered him a ride into the heart of darkness. Lost in the dense forest, Jake stumbled through the undergrowth, his heart pounding in his chest as he struggled to put distance between himself and the nightmare he had just experienced. Every rustle of the leaves, every snap of a twig beneath his feet sent shivers down his spine, his mind consumed by the fear of what lurked in the darkness. As the hours passed, exhaustion began to take its toll, and Jake's frantic pace slowed to a stumbling crawl. He knew he couldn't go on much longer, but the thought of stopping, of allowing the darkness to consume him, filled him with a bone-deep terror. Just when he thought he could go no further, a faint glimmer of light appeared through the trees ahead, beaconing him forward like a beacon of hope. With renewed determination, Jake pressed on, his weary legs carrying him towards the promise of salvation. As he emerged from the forest, Jake found himself standing on the edge of a desolate highway, the road stretching out before him like a lifeline in the darkness. Without hesitation, he began to walk, his gaze fixed on the horizon as he put one foot in front of the other, driven by the desperate need to escape the nightmare that had consumed him. But as the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Jake's relief turned to horror as he realized that he had returned to the very same stretch of road where his journey had begun. The highway stretched out before him, empty and desolate, with no sign of life in either direction. A sense of utter hopelessness washed over Jake as he sank to his knees, his mind consumed by despair. Had it all been a dream, a figment of his imagination born from exhaustion and fear? Or was he trapped in some twisted nightmare from which there was no escape? With a heavy heart, Jake rose to his feet, resigned to his fate as he trudged along the endless highway, each step a painful reminder of the horrors that awaited him in the darkness. And as the sun dipped below the horizon once more, casting the world into shadow, Jake knew that he would spend eternity wandering the lonely roads of the countryside, forever haunted by the memory of the phantom hitchhiker who had offered him a ride into the abyss. For in the heart of the darkness, there are no second chances, no escape from the horrors that lurk just beyond the edge of perception. And as Jake disappeared into the night, swallowed whole by the inky blackness of the road, he knew that he would never truly be free from the terrors that awaited him in the shadows.